Hi, everyone. Welcome. To give a bit of an introduction, Ad attended the National Academy of Fine Arts, Prilidiano Pueyrredon, where they graduated in 2003. Did studies with an artist named Diana Eisenberg, which were completed in 2006, and was part of a program called Centro de Investigaciones Artísticas in Buenos Aires from 2009 to 2011, which is when the two of us first met. Their work has been exhibited very widely with exhibitions in Argentina, France, Germany, Italy, China, South Korea, and Portugal. And our project, Manifestación Pluriversal, is their first solo project in the central Midwest, and also their first project that includes artwork by other artists, which is very, very exciting for us. Just a little note on timing. We'll start off kind of talking about some of Ad's the inspirations for your work, the kind of histories of some South American modernism that were very central to what you're doing. Then we'll also talk about some of their projects, and then we'll talk more specifically about Manifestación Pluriversal, and we'll leave time also for questions in case anybody has those at the end. Okay. So we're going to start off kind of talking about some of the artists who were very influential for you. And so we're going back to Buenos Aires in the 1940s. And I think one of the kind of things that I realized when I first got to visit and spend some time at Centro de Investigaciones Artísticas was that there was a whole modernism that I had no idea about, right? So local artists who were making things. One of them is Yente, who was working in the 40s and was part of the Madi group. So this is an untitled work of Yente's from 1948, and maybe you can kind of talk a little bit about...
Well, thank you, gracias everyone for your time. I hope this is entertainment, because most of everything I wanted to show Argentinian art history that is a huge influence on my work. But yeah, like you say, not many people in the global north know about them. So Yente is actually before Madi, just a little bit older, but great reference for me in terms of thinking geometrical abstraction, but through collage, through recycled material. This series of sculptures were made with telgopor.
Telgopor is styrofoam.
That one. That they recycle. And I like this example. Yeah, you can go to the next one. Because comparing to other references that we have on geometrical abstraction, her work is kind of rustic. It doesn't have the industrial finish or some details that we see on books. And when you see it in real life, it's really like arte povera, almost. But this concept of collage is something that I bring to every work, installations, performance, paintings. So the second reference that I wanted to share is Grupo Madi, that was originated in the 40s, and it's like you say, the Argentinian avant-garde, the modern movement that cannot relate geometry, concrete art with ideas that we can call now like socialist. They were working shaped canvas in order to break with the rectangle as a window. So they have a manifesto, and they wanted to proclaim like pure invention and creation without being copies of the real world.
And one of the things also that you mentioned that was important and that I think will come up a little bit later in our discussion was that it wasn't that they were just looking at paintings, right? They're looking at creations across the board. So in film, in photography, in poetry, in acting, and stage work. So all of those things are kind of part of it. So it's a really kind of a total vision of kind of futurity at that point.
And in that sense, it was great for me to think painting as an expanded concept that can go into a wall, into the space, the architecture, into workshops, like the one we just have.
Yeah, and sorry, I should mention too, one of the things that you told me that I thought was really important was that the scale of a lot of these works was smaller. And so the kind of intention on the part of the artists was that these were artworks that were made for people's homes, not just for the walls of museums that had like much more space. And so it was in that way also a very kind of populist movement.
And in that sense, I think it goes to every stereotype of political Latin American art, because they were truly thinking about concrete art as a way of human liberation.
So we'll just kind of talk about a few people that participated in the Madi movement. One is Rod Rothfuss, who was Uruguayan, but who was working often in Buenos Aires. So this is his Composición Madi, or Madi composition, from 1948. And Ad, what was it that kind of drew you to Rothfuss's work?
Well, I think I love the work, like very graphic, and I always saw these characters are like characters, no? Like I project the way I interpreted these ensembles for me are like geometrical Frankensteins.
So we'll see that actually in some other images that we'll look at of Ad's work a little bit further on here. Another one, and I think here, right, you get a sense of the kind of figurative, this one could be a kind of strange duck, but this one is called Tres Círculos Rojos, or Three Red Circles. Also very playful work, and I think certainly like that is a kind of sensibility that I think your work shares.
Well, I was a big fan of Memphis Group, and I think Old Madi also kind of predict, a lot of aesthetics from the 80s in a way, and I like also that connection.
Yeah. And then it's also nice to see kind of works that are made a little bit later, so into the 1950s, into that kind of moment where it's like, atomic age here, and I think lots of folks like think about these things like the, mid-century design, let's say.
Yeah.
And so these things were certainly kind of part of that vision of what the future looked like for many of these artists. Then we have Gila Kosice, who was born in Slovakia, but also worked in Buenos Aires. And so maybe kind of talk about what for you is important. Kosice is working not only in painting, but in sculpture, and making works that were also kinetic works.
Yeah, I wanted to show this work because it also kind of show one of the characteristics of Madi that we can find in the manifesto, that is how the sculpture can be interactive and articulate. And I like this mutant quality of a work that, again, I relate to a character, to a body that is like, mutant. No?
Yeah, I don't know if this one does it, but we looked at some other examples of Kosice's work, and these little kind of dots that are in it, in some cases those were actually hinges, so you could actually kind of turn parts so that the sculpture itself never had a kind of singular form, that it could be adapted and changed. And then, of course, the painting with cut frame. I think, again, we see that kind of notion of breaking this kind of, traditional rectangle that I think most of us think about when we think of a painting, right? And they were certainly playing with these kinds of. Then Carmelo Arden Quinn.
Yeah, these three are kind of considered the three founders of the movement.
And so here again, we're looking at a kind of shaped canvas that has also a kind of shaped frame that echoes it. And I think that, that sensibility, it still seems to me to be incredibly playful and fresh, even today. Then a work called Neor from 1947. Here we see a little bit, maybe, I imagine, a kind of sense of the kind of figuration that's possible, even though there was Madi artists were saying like no representational work. They didn't want something that looked like a figure, that looked like a room, that looked like plants or a landscape. This one has it for me a little bit, but
yeah, because for me that's the thing. They were trying to explore an universal language that we know doesn't exist. But what happened with all this work now, when you have so many other references like comics or like other links, to be made. And I think that's the great part of the historical references that can be functional for your present.
Yeah, and that change over time also.
Right.
I think that's certainly something that's very dynamic about the work that you're creating these days. And then also kind of incredible, to see a work that was made by Arden Quinn in 2010. So somebody who was with us until quite recently, and incredible to see the ways that the work kind of evolves and also what remains the same over the years. And then Dee Lan, who was one of the kind of few participants in Madi who was a woman.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because one of the things that I got in conflict with art history is this type of problems that geometrical abstraction is a field very male-dominated, and that kind of also reflects on their manifesto. So for me, avant-garde kind of discriminate a lot of themes and subjects that for me are vital, like from feminist and queer theory, but also thinking tenderness, humor, childhood.
And I think one of the things that you brought up about Lan's work that seemed really important was also kind of taking this idea of the shaped canvas and basically taking the center of the painting out. And so maybe it's not so great in this image, but maybe we see here a little bit better this kind of open center that expresses a really different sense of space.
Yeah, I think also at the time it's a big challenge to define the public too. And this is another example of the articulate structures, because also, Articulada is the title, but yeah, all these series can be moved.
And so then just to show also, I think one of the things that feels really special to me about your work is the way that you're both referencing these histories, but also then kind of reaching further. And so thinking about things that there were prohibitions with, say, with Madi artists, about like, oh, you can't make something that is representative, so nothing that looks like an object, right? And so what you're saying is like, why is that useful to have that kind of limitation or that rule? And so then kind of going back and looking at some of the figures that we'll see kind of that are on this table over on the side are figures that were drawn directly from this book by D. Valle that was basically to teach people how to draw in a modern way.
But also using geometry.
And using geometry. And this, we should say, is also published in Buenos Aires in the 1940s, right?
Yeah, because coming from the history of painting, one of the binaries that I think is the most strong is this figurative versus abstraction. And if I want to have an approach as non-binary practice, like I think that's one of the first binaries that you have to challenge.
Yeah, it's like, why choose one or the other when you can choose both? So let's see if we can get this to play in the background for a little bit. I think this is also something that kind of comes to us.
It was one of the references that I wanted to show when I think about geometrical characters.
And so this is from Oscar Schlemmer's Triadic Ballet, from the scene that's called the Yellow Scene.
So again, an artist that designed these costumes for dance, for theater, and I love that multidisciplinary aspect that they have. Like Grupo Madi in their manifesto, they were also referring to poetry, dance, architecture, theater.
And do we remember the exact year of? It's got to be I think this is in the 40s, the original. Not, of course, this recording, but I could watch this forever, but I think we'll move on. And so then some of the references are also kind of are much more contemporary. So maybe you can talk about Owl House and why that is a kind of important touchstone.
Yeah. Well, the other time last Saturday that we made a little introduction to all the participants in order to show my references. I forgot to show Steven Universe and the Owl House that are super important. Like I said, it's not the same for me to take the art history like after, having these other references. I wanted to bring this tool mostly because in the case of the Owl House, I'm very interested in this idea of the alternative universe, the portal that take you to another realm. But actually, I also like the queer representation, of course, in the cartoons, but how the creator, Dana Terrace, also used fantasy as a way to criticize the times we're living. And because many people say that fantasy can work as escapism, but I think fantasy is a great tool to rethink the way we live and everything.
To
that
reimagine reality rather than to try and get away from it. Yeah,
exactly. And then I brought Steven Universe because also it's the first non-binary creator on this history of Cartoon Network. That is also feels like crazy because its animation should be more diverse by now, but it's still very male-dominated. And not only love the backgrounds and the palette and all the history behind the gems and these aliens, and how this science fiction has a non-violent approach to, because you have battles and everything, but they're not binaries as good and evil. Like there's a great arc between a lot of the characters.
More spectrum. So I think then this kind of helps us make a bit of more of a segue into talking more specifically about Ad's work, but I think you'll see the kind of relationship between that last image and this work, which was a painting that you created at Gallery Daniel Abate in Buenos Aires in what year?
12 years ago.
12 years ago.
2012.
And so, you know, I think some of the things that are happening here that feel like they're really important are the kind of use of representation, right? And incorporating these geometric figures into it, but also the ways in which the painting kind of wraps around the room. So we see in this corner over here where the painting, you know, kind of goes across the corner, doesn't necessarily feel like it needs to pay attention to the architecture of the space, but kind of creates a new architecture.
And also it's a proposal for this site specific to bring back this fantastical forest, like a landscape, you know, against the white cube, against the white wall, like trying to break with that dynamic.
And then these are some of the kind of figures. These are from your Queer Deco series. So these were kind of taking images out of designer interior magazines that were published in Buenos Aires and other places in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and just taking really interesting kind of interiors and inserting these kind of more inventive figures into them.
Yeah. I call this series Queer Decos because I wanted to replace the human users by these, again, like geometrical monsters or non-human. And I think of them as cyborgs, you know. Well, we'll see next also we have furries. And so for me, these characters also change the dynamic of the decoration by changing the users.
And it also goes back to what you were talking about before with collage, right? Thinking about a new way of kind of inserting a new character into an already existing image.
And for me, it was important also to work with decoration magazines from the 70s and 80s, where the aesthetics are really marked with the decades, and breaking that with the aesthetics or the graphics of the Frankenstein. It's also for me breaking with a human timeline, how we see different decades with different aesthetics.
Oh, that's a nice. I hadn't thought about it that way, but it is nice to kind of, you know, if we're already not paying attention to the rules, then why do we get stuck in kind of thinking that a particular object needs to stay in its kind of period, correct?
And also because one of the things that art history also does academically is to think history as an evolution, kind of to naturalize the way things are.
Right.
We should break with that too.
Yeah, that kind of linear idea of history can also be very kind of singular, right? It's like one story.
And again, the problem with the universal concept.
Yep.
Or the concept of the universal.
And so then maybe you can talk a little bit about what's happening in these images that we're seeing.
Well, this series of characters, like that started with squares. For me, it was the same exercise that Madrid did with their shaped canvas, but instead of using a broken frame, I wanted to go back to the cube also and just create characters. So in this one, you see a lot of eyes because I was thinking this series is called Cyclops, like kind of mythical monsters in a geometric way.
And we'll end up seeing some similar things as well in some of the paintings that will eventually be incorporated into the final composition atop this mural in the end. I'm going to kind of pick things up a little bit. These are some works that were that Ad showed in the Venice Biennial in 2019. as well as these works. And I think here what becomes very interesting is to think of these figures. So you've basically introduced viewers in a way. These are you've talked about them as personas.
I like the idea of the furry as an animal, as a fandom that is also based on fantasy and Disney characters, but I wanted to break also the dynamics of the painting in the white cube, because now you have these visitors that kind of put yourself into another.
And they're in a kind of
place.
interesting space, because you walk in and you wonder, like, are these people who are just standing really still? But then you see that they're kind of mannequins. But then they're also like, they're simultaneously sculptures and they're not. So they're kind of quite special. And then a more recent exhibition, Nave Vermelha, that was in Lisbon, in Portugal. And then we'll maybe we're getting to the end here of what we'll talk about. But this is a kind of a particularly interesting exhibition that happened at Baltic in Gateshead in the UK. And what we're seeing here are both some kind of an integration of some architecture, built architecture into the space. The chairs that you see kind of back in that room that have the green dots in them were a meeting space for the Feminist School of Painting that you've started. And so that really kind of signals part of the kind of social concerns that you have for the space and the way that kind of opportunities arise to bring people together to talk about these issues. Maybe you can kind of talk a little bit about what that was like.
Yeah, the Feminist School of Painting started in 2018 as also in San Francisco, actually, as a way to criticize the scholar system, how it's divided by age, how it's not for everyone, basically. And well, many other stuff around painting and how we can rethink feminist, queer methods or the construction of the scholar system.
Some of the paintings that were in there, some more of the personas. And we can also mention that these are your practice is quite collaborative, and so some of the costumes that these furries are wearing are costumes that you made designing fabrics in collaboration with other fashion designers, which I think is a...
Yeah, some other furries also have T-shirts by other artists.
I think we...
And another important element is I always try to make like bookshelves with a lot of info, publications, and well, in this case, the scenes.
And I think one of the things that's also really special for us, our Teen Museum Studies cohort this year got to do an interview with Ad, and so we are actually producing a zine to celebrate the exhibition. And so part of it will be the interview that they did, there's some writing that I did, and then there's also a part of it that will function as a coloring book. And so Ad has also been kind of really thinking about these ways in which kind of accessibility works within the art that you're making. I think one of the really interesting conversations that we've had and that certainly were brought up by our TMS cohort was thinking about the place of cuteness and why we think generally as a society that something that's cute is maybe not serious. And I think that remains a kind of very fundamental question within your work that it's nice to see you kind of pushing against.
Well, one of the things of the mural behind us is that it will look like a huge collage, and a lot of the elements are based on this need of radical tenderness that I think we have as a society.
Radical tenderness?
Yes.
Nice.
Like without irony and
yeah.
authentic tenderness.
I think that that's a kind of very important stuff. Maybe we can also kind of open it up. I know we also had a question box that maybe some people were dropping questions into. Yeah.
Question I missed? No, Maria's one.
We'll take the question box.
Can we take the question box? Or just deliver it? Thanks.
I think it's empty.
It's empty. No.
No?
I thought I saw people doing stuff. No.
Oh.
We got plenty of questions.
Eric.
Okay. So our first question for you is, what is the point of a mural? How do murals change the environment that they're in?
Good question. I don't have the answers. My theory is that a mural changes the way we interact, first with the scale, no? Now the body has a different relationship that with just a canvas, or there's something with the size that I think is very important. But in this particular mural, I think the interaction, all the feelings and experience that we have with the workshop, I think are part of the painting, maybe in a spiritual way, but I think it changed a little the micropolitics around. I mean, we're not going to change the world tomorrow, but we have a real good time.
But we changed it on Saturday a little bit. Yeah.
Hopefully.
Okay. Next question is, what cartoons influenced you growing up?
Well, I'm still influenced by cartoons, and I think it's like a door, and mostly how cartoons are treated now. Like that was something we were talking, the difference from cartoons now that 30 years ago. I think now they're more bold into criticizing, what's going on, and kind of, being for all ages. So I think it's a door, for your inner child, but also as a permit that many people don't have in society.
Any questions from the audience before I kind of continue on with questions out of the box? Yes.
I'm going to get a microphone.
Hi, this is wonderful, thank you. I'm hung up on radical tenderness. I'm like, so just that resonates with me personally, and I'm just think our world needs it right now in so many ways. Do you link that to queerness? Or how do you link that to queerness?
Well, I think I have many examples now in my head, but if you think a lot of the what is labeled as queer art is around tenderness, about childhood. I have this word that I use as a concept that is peluche, that in Spanish means like plush, like toy, like the teddy bear. So it's the furry, the softness, and I think this universo peluche that I think is my work comes from deconstructing thanks to queer theory, like all the concepts that we are given, like naturalized from, I don't know, the love the jungle to late capitalism.
Yeah, I also think, if I can kind of jump in on that one too, I think this kind of idea of radical tenderness, as a queer person who kind of grew up around people who really wanted to make space at the table for everybody, every kind of gender expression, every kind of age, like really understanding that having that kind of diversity and that kind of care for other people is an opportunity to kind of learn, to expand our families, our chosen families. And I think was for me a really important part of kind of understanding how to kind of ground myself. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So back to some of our questions here. What do you think the effect of public art is? How does the public benefit from public art?
What would it be, public art?
I don't know. I mean, does anybody know who asked this?
Okay.
If we don't, well, we can get to it at another point. But
my interpretation.
I would think like public art are the kinds of objects that we encounter in the public. I think, in a way, I think what's really special is also to kind of think about one of the things that to me feels really special as a relatively recent arrival to St. Louis is how many of our public institutions are free, right? So no boundaries to getting in where you're paying a $30 admission or things like that. That feels really important and really vital and part of what makes this city so special. And so in a way, I feel like, as a public institution, right, that anybody can walk through the door, I think of public art not just as those kind of sculptures that we see outside, right, when we're in
But the public access to art.
But public access.
And they also ask, do you have a personal story? And I do. Like, I come from a working class family, and if it wasn't for the public access or the free access to art, I wouldn't be here, because the way I learned was with free education, and I was able to go to the national school because it was free. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah.
Big change.
Yeah, goals. Other questions from the audience? Okay, so then I will ask on behalf of someone who dropped this question in, has African art influenced you at all?
I must say that one of the biggest problems of Argentina is the way that we follow European art history. Basically, the whole identity of Argentina is European design from the colonization. So it's one of my homework.
I mean, I think that's also no different than what's happening here in the United States, right? Where our kind of inherited art history is, by and large, a kind of Eurocentric affair. And it's only kind of more recently that museums especially are kind of thinking about diversity and thinking about what has been kind of happening in other cultures and how that, what histories are there out there and what stories that we don't know about. And that's
part of the idea of pluriversal. That is something that we miss to say.
Of the pluriverse, exactly. Yeah, so we should maybe kind of mention that the title of the exhibition, Manifestación Pluriversal. Manifestación is the Spanish word for a protest or a march or a rally. Pluriversal is a kind of notion that refers to not just the idea of a singular history, right, like the idea of the history, but the idea that there are many histories, many ways of approaching history, and that all of those can exist at the same time together, so that it's not this kind of, monocultural history. Okay. I think to answer whoever asked, is this a joinable program? Sure. What is your favorite medium to use?
Painting. But I work a lot with the computer, so I must say
Yeah. But I also think that, in a way, all of the kind of collaborations that you're doing are also things that activate social spaces and kind of activate political potential within your work. And I think that's also a very special part of your practice.
So, mixed media.
Okay. Whoa, and here, this last question is the biggest one. How has being a contemporary artist affected you?
Well, I'm super lucky. Not many of my colleagues back in Argentina have this luck of traveling, meeting so many people, and yeah, I'm very, very lucky. I'm very thankful for that. But I think the contemporary benefit is this, having all these tools to kind of construct history.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So I will just kind of share with everyone. I think that feels like a nice place to stop, unless anybody has a burning question that they haven't yet asked.
I actually do.
Oh, yeah.
Hi. Hi. So you're using the work of these teenagers who are queer. What would you tell your own teenage self now that you've lived further on? Like, what kind of hope or radical tenderness would you give to your teenage self?
If I get to talk with my younger self, I will say, like, you don't have to conform to the model of artists that you see in the books or in the movies. Once you understand that you can build your own model of artists, I think that's a huge door for many other things to happen. Whether the art market or the art system understand or not, I think that allow yourself or giving yourself the permission to try, I think it's a big step.
Yeah, I think in that way too, right? It's oftentimes in art what we're looking for are the things that are original, right? The things that we haven't seen before. And so in that way, I think it's also important to be who you are, right? That's the original thing. And I think that's the thing that ends up being really, really quite powerful.
There are no essence also. Like, we had the freedom to build ourselves.
Any last questions? Excellent. Well, Ad, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And please also come back and join us. Sorry. So this next round of exhibitions will open to the public on Friday, September 6th from 6 to 9. Free and open to the public. We'll be opening 7 exhibitions simultaneously. So there'll be lots of other things that are not quite on view yet in the galleries that will be there for you to see. Also lots of local artists. Not only the Proud Art STL artists that we were working with, but our artists who are participating in the Great Rivers Biennial, 3 local artists there, and Charlie Atlas, as well as an artist, Glenisha, who is in our upstairs education gallery. So lots of great local creativity to come back and see. And then the following day, we'll have a panel discussion for the Great Rivers Biennial. All of this information is also available on our website. So thank you all for coming.